Hello, everybody. I'm Sean Allison, the director of the Durrington Research School, and I'm going to be talking today about self-regulation. And this is the third video in a series of three that we've produced. So the first one was by Chris Runnicles, talking about what self-regulation is and the issues with it relating to distance teaching. And then in the second one, Mark Rowland talked about the issues associated with self-regulation, particularly from the viewpoint of the disadvantaged students and how we can support them with that. And what I'm going to attempt to do today is to have a think about self-regulation and just kind of talk about it in terms of things that we can do as teachers that might help a little bit during these really challenging times that we're finding ourselves in. So when we talk about self-regulation, this is essentially what we're talking about. It's the extent to which learners are aware of their strengths and weaknesses and, what they can do about it, really. Do they know the strategies to use to help them learn and to address those weaknesses that they identify for themselves? And I think when it comes to distance teaching, there's a few issues that we're trying to tackle with regards to this. I think firstly, understandably, the temptation in this new world is just to focus on the content delivery. And of course, whilst that's really, really important, what can then happen with that is that we neglect things like metacognition, self-regulation. So it's important for us to be thinking about it. It's hard. Being self-regulated as a learner is tricky in a controlled classroom environment. It's even harder at home with all the distractions that are possibly around there. So, not to underestimate that what we're trying to do here is really, really difficult. But, we do our best. We miss those visual cues that we get in a classroom, and you'll know what I'm talking about. So we'll see students struggling, and we'll make a decision there about how we kind of intervene with that. We don't have those with distance teaching, and then as a result, it's hard for us to intervene and help them in terms of self-regulation. When they're experiencing that real-time struggle because they're behind a screen in their houses. So it's really, really hard, and we shouldn't beat ourselves up over this. But it's about thinking, okay, right, within those constraints, are there things that we can be doing that can perhaps make this a little bit better and a little bit easier for students? And of course, when we think about self-regulation, we think about it in terms of helping them to, plan the task that they're going to do. So, what's worked before? How can they bring that to this current task? And then whilst they're working, how they're monitoring their own progress, how they're, where the checkpoints are for them, how they can respond to those checkpoints and adjust what they're doing, and then evaluating it. So at the end of it, what's worked, where were their successes, where were their challenges, and how will they use those to inform what they do in the future. So that's what we're kind of focusing on, and that's what I've broken this down into. So let's think about it in terms of planning first of all. So I think there are some straightforward things that we can be doing. So number one there, just simply reminding them at the start of a distance lesson, have they got all their things there? Have they got their exercise book, their textbook, their pens, their pencils? What quite a few teachers are doing that I've seen, which I think is really, really good, as well as having a Loom video, also signposting them to useful websites that they can be referring to during that distance lesson if they get stuck. Explicitly explaining your planning strategies prior to the completion of a task. So using Loom videos, other videos for you, as you would in your lessons, but you modelling the planning strategies that you would usually use, but obviously, doing that virtually via video. Starting with a short quiz. to retrieve what they've learned previously, because that's going to kind of cue them into the new learning that they're going to be doing that lesson. But don't just assume that they'll kind of do that. I think if we provide quizzes and things for them, that's going to support students with that. And also, as well as retrieving previous knowledge, ask them questions online that are going to make them think about successful strategies they've used in the past. So I've seen, maths teachers doing this really brilliantly before they start the new lesson, just getting them to think about strategies that they've used to solve similar problems in previous lessons, just to bring that to the forefront of their minds before they start, and then asking them, why those strategies were successful. Prompting them to think about where they're going to start on the task rather than just jumping in. And of course, worked examples can really support this. But being explicit about that and asking them, via the Loom video again, or whatever on the stream if you're using Google Classrooms. So, what's going to be your first step with this? What are we going to do? And then following that on with, what are the other strategies that they're going to be using to complete the task? So, really all the sorts of things that we would normally do in a lesson, but finding ways to do that. And I think that, us using videos of ourselves to kind of explicitly talk through those strategies can be really powerful and really useful for students. So once they've then started the task, how can we support them in terms of monitoring their learning? I think this first point is really, really important. This is something that we're certainly learning here. Really reduce the amount that we're trying to cover in a distance lesson. Because that's important for all sorts of reasons in terms of cognitive overload, etc. But also, if we're expecting students to monitor their learning on their own independently, then if we reduce the volume of things that they're having to learn, then that's probably going to give them a better chance of success with that. Put in checkpoints during the distance lesson. So as we would normally, don't just plow on through the content, but put in points again. If you're using a Loom video, to stop and pause and encourage them to reflect on how they're doing, and perhaps, post comments, questions about that on the stream. Loom videos can be great for talking through practice questions. But I think what we need to do is think carefully about reducing the amount of guidance that we give on each question. And then as we do that, ask them for feedback on how they're doing as that guidance is faded out. And then what that can then result in, I think, is that if they're given the opportunity to kind of then post, I was fine with that bit, but I'm still struggling with this bit, then what we can then do is use that formatively as we would, then to perhaps produce a more bespoke Loom video on those particular bits that they were struggling with that can perhaps, form the basis of the start of the next lesson. Number 4, really important, remind them that it's okay to stop and start again. That's absolutely fine. And actually to rewind the teacher video. So if they're struggling with something, that's perfectly fine to do that. In fact, just before I started this, I was just talking to one of our students, and I was just asking him how he was finding it, and he was saying that he's enjoying it, because what he can do is, if he's in a lesson, if he's really, if he hasn't understood something, and say it's a Loom video, what he can do is he can stop it and he can rewind it, and he can hear the explanation again, and he can keep doing that until he understands it. And he actually said, it'd be really good if I could do that with my teachers in real time. So it's encouraging that that's a really useful and a really good strategy to do. As I said at the start, encourage them to have other tabs open. So things like, if you're doing a Loom video explaining something, also signpost them to perhaps the relevant bite-size page. So if they get stuck on the Loom video, they can pause it and they've got somewhere to go. Because, of course, what they would do in a lesson, if they got stuck, they would put a hand up and ask you. So it's providing them things. So as they're monitoring their learning, if they get stuck, they've got somewhere else to go. So that's really important, I think. Providing them with procedural checklists for tasks that contain many parts. And that's useful for writing and multi-step problems. Now, of course, we'd have to carefully talk them through those procedural checklists. And again, a Loom video would be really, really useful for that. But I think if we kind of talk them through and show them the checklist and how they could be used, they can use that checklist to monitor their progress as they're kind of working through. So that just helps to structure their own monitoring of their learning. And then that last one, model how when the students can monitor their work, a Loom video breaking down the questions the students can ask themselves, the varied answers to these questions, and how that might change their work. So again, that can be, rather than just putting the question out there and asking students to do it, as a part of that video instruction, well, okay, let's have a look at this question. How can we break that down? So, the question is asking us to explain something. So, we need to make sure that we're not just describing it, that we are actually explaining it. Again, these are the sort of things that we would intuitively do in a lesson, but, we can be thinking about doing virtually via videos. Now, of course, it's not a fantastic substitute for being in a classroom with students, but it's trying to make it, the best out of it as we can. And then finally, evaluating. So, when we get to the end of our distance lesson, don't just stop the video at the content, say goodbye and we'll see you next lesson. Encourage them to reflect on what they struggled with and the strategies they use to unstick themselves in that lesson. And then they can share that, if you're using something like Google Classroom, they can give feedback on the stream about the areas that they struggled with and how they overcome those difficulties. Always go back to the kind of the key learning points that were covered in that lesson. But remember, as I said at the start, it's far more focused and short during a distance lesson. We're not trying to cover too much, but refer them back to that. And how do they think they did with each of those things? And then remind them again at that point if there were, say, two main learning points for that lesson, if they're really not clear on, say, the second one, to rewind the video and go back through it again. And then post any questions that they have on the stream for you to address next lesson. Using short self-marked quizzes to help them evaluate their understanding can be really, really useful. So Google Forms is absolutely great for this, and that allows them to evaluate their understanding and how they've done. And prompt students just to ask questions on the areas they were stuck on. We've talked a lot about distance teaching and us as teachers asking questions of students on the stream, but also prompting students to ask questions on the areas that they're stuck on is really, really important. So I think there are some things that we can be doing and just thinking about adapting our distance teaching just that little bit, just to help students in this whole sort of area of self-regulation, which is really important now, but of course it's going to be really, really important when students actually come back to school. So I hope these 3 videos have been useful. We'll continue to post regular blogs on the Research School blog and Class Teaching, trying to support you with this brave new world of distance teaching, and we hope it's useful. And as always, you can always contact us and ask us any questions via email or on Twitter. So I hope that's useful, folks. Stay well, look after yourself, and keep doing the brilliant job that you all are.